are listening to the Solar Panel, the Phoenix Suns Show.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Suns Solar Panel. Wow, it's been a few weeks since we've been here, Zona. We had a recorded show a couple of weeks ago, and then we didn't do a show this past weekend. I was out of town visiting family and all that over the 4th of July weekend, and Brandon was in his bed, curled up under the covers and everything, sick from a non-COVID head cold or some kind of sickness. So we're sorry we didn't bring you guys a show the past couple of weeks, a live show, but we are thrilled to be back. My name is Dave King. You can find me at Dave King NBA on Twitter. I'm joined here with my regular podcast partner, Brandon. How's it going, man?
Good to be back. We were just talking off air just about how the Suns streak over the Lakers continues, dating back to the postseason and preseason. I don't care if it's Summer League, preseason, 2K, whatever. It's just great to beat the Lakers. So it's a good way to cap off the Friday night.
That's right. And we are joined by a special guest, Caitlin Cooper, who covers the Pacers, and she puts the rest of us to shame on how much she knows about the game of basketball and how little we know. And I just love it. I just love following you. No, really, I do. And your insights into the game and how teams are doing. Unfortunately, it's being wasted on a bad Pacers team right now. So you know what isn't supposed to look like. But they have got some up and coming players, and who knows? Phoenix Suns fans may become Pacers fans west pretty soon, because you've already got Jalen Smith, who everyone suddenly thinks was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you've got Tyrese Halliburton, who everybody constantly, we get more Tyrese Halliburton mentions than we do almost Devin Booker mentions in Suns Twitter about how the Suns should have drafted him. And then you may get Deandre Ayton in the next few days. So we'll just have to, we'll talk through all of those ramifications. But if you guys had a 3-man group of Jalen Smith, DeAndre Ayton, and Tyrese Halliburton, you're going to have a ton of Suns fans watching Pacers games and following Caitlin Cooper. Caitlin, good morning.
Hey, thanks for having me on again. It does feel like there's a lot of back and forth between Suns and Pacers players. The last time I was on here, we were talking about Torrey Craig and Aaron Holiday and Jalen Smith. So here I am back again.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have the worst of them with Torrey Craig on our team.
How about TJ Warren too? So
yeah,
right.
There's a lot that both those fan bases can commiserate about with regards to how injuries are handled and what goes on, and trying to decipher what exactly is going on with that.
Yeah, we knew firsthand first about how TJ Warren's injuries seem to just compound and linger and all that. He played a total of 4 games since the bubble in 2020 for the Pacers in 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, the whole way that was kind of put out there was pretty strange. At the end of the season, Woj reports that during his time out, he actually sustained consecutive stress fractures in that foot, and that's kind of what had kept him out. But the whole year, the Pacers just kept, every time there was an update, his scan was favorable, and he was going to be back in weeks, not months. And months and months went past, and nothing happened.
TJ and Zion might have been working out together. I don't know.
Yeah, very similar stories.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, and the folks in the chat have brought up some other connections that we didn't even bring up yet. Benedict Mathurin, who played for U of A this past year.
Yeah.
So he's your rookie, and we'll talk about him a little bit here. TJ McConnell, who's been on the team, also has Arizona ties, University of Arizona ties. We unfortunately don't get any pros since James Harden from ASU, Arizona State, which is local in Phoenix, but we got a lot of U of A people out there in the NBA, and they all seem to go through either Phoenix or Indiana, it seems like. So that's great. So let's dive right in here and talk a little bit about this. The first thing everybody wants to talk about is how Jalen Smith is now a starting power forward in the NBA. And Caitlin, I've talked to you a little bit about this at midseason after a couple of games on this show about how Jalen Smith was doing in his first few games in Indiana. And I'd like to get an update from you. Do you see him as give us your scouting report on Jalen Smith as an NBA player.
Yeah, that came up as a bit of a surprise to me when he was introduced that he was staying and that he was announced flat out as the starting power forward. Yeah, I mean, I think that was in part his incentive for being able to stay put was that they had offered him a bigger role and opportunity. He said multiple times that he was choosing his future, not instant gratification.
Yeah.
And that went into his decision making. But yeah, his first few games with Indiana, he was really shooting the heck out of the three ball. I mean, he was over 40% over, I think, his first 7 or 8 games. That kind of tapered back down a little bit as the season went on. He had dealt with a little bit of an injury stuff, and it went down to about 31%, which is his career mark. But he showed quite a bit of shot versatility. Like, I can kind of understand it because he did do stuff out of the pick and pop. He ran into the corner off of exit screens and made some shots. And also, like, they were in Orlando and he made a few trailer threes, which was very surprising to me as well. So that's probably some of what Rick Carlisle's banking on. I think they're really going to have to hope that 3-point percentage stays nearer to where it was when he first came over than down below, because, I mean, I know that Suns fans, he doesn't do a lot off the dribble. I mean, I think he had 7 attempts maybe off of two or more dribbles. I mean, that can be a little bit dicey. His decision making between whether he's going to face up or go to a methodical back down is somewhat up and down for him as well. But he impressed. I mean, there was reason for a rebuilding team to continue to want him to come back and be part of that group, especially like defensively. When you compare him to Goga Bitadze, because Jalen during this stretch was filling in a lot at backup 5 because Isaiah Jackson and Goga both had injuries. Goga cannot switch out pretty much at all. Like that was, and Jalen has his issues switching in terms of he can't play very close to the ball. Sometimes he'll give up threes, like they played Darius Garland and they kind of got toasted in that department, as well as Anthony Edwards, but he can stay in front better than what their other options were. So if it was just going to be a flat out decision between, do you want to keep making the Goga thing try to happen, or do you want to go with Jalen? That was a pretty easy choice. Now they haven't done anything with Goga yet. And then as it turned out, he was announced as the starting 4. I personally see him more as a 5 who can occasionally play some 4 than a 4 who can occasionally play some 5. But I guess we're going to find out and see how that looks.
Yeah, I think Indiana just needs to lie to Jalen, tell him he's going to play the 4, and then get DeAndre, lie to him, tell him he's going to play the 4. Exactly. And then that way they're both happy and they can play 2 bigs together.
Exactly.
That would be funny if DeAndre Ayton joins the Pacers and plays next to Jalen Smith. It would be interesting to watch who spends more time at the quote unquote 4 position. So Caitlin, help me out, because I it's funny the way you describe Jalen Smith is exactly the way he left Phoenix, which is he's a sneaky 5. In that he really, really fits the 5 better, but he's a little undersized. And because he can shoot a 3, he looks like, gosh, he'd be a perfect 4. 5, 4, 3. So he'd be a perfect 4, but he's really not a perfect 4, because in today's NBA, you've got to be able to switch out and defend on the perimeter, which is actually something DeAndre Ayton can do better than most. And he can also trail and get the contest, if not the block, because he doesn't go for the big wide blocks like a lot of these guys do. But staying with Jalen Smith for a minute, and even talking anybody really, what do you see in today's NBA as an ideal 5 versus an ideal 4?
You know, what's funny is that a lot of times I think if there is a question of that, if we're even asking if somebody is a 4 or 5 in today's NBA, I think they're probably a 5. I think that's probably just what the default should be. I mean, I think at the 4 spot, it's what I said. Like, I think that you need to be able to do more with a closeout. You need to be able to show that you can get all the way to the basket. And that wasn't, I think, about 5% of the time on Jalen's spot up opportunities he got to the basket. I think that only amounted to like 5 total possessions when he was with the Pacers. So like just as an example, they're up in Detroit. He gets a closeout against Corey Joseph and tries to take him off the dribble. And that kind of amounts into, a floater, which is kind of a strange thing for a 4 to be trying to take a guard off the dribble instead of, going into more of like a Barkley drive and backing them down to the block. It was kind of curious just in general. You asked that question that, Rick Carlisle didn't say he's our starting stretch 4. He didn't say he's our starting 4. He said he's our starting power forward. So there were a few games where, he might have gotten a switch and done something there. But a lot of times it's like, okay, you're playing the Celtics. Maybe he has a switch against Peyton Pritchard, and that wasn't really going anywhere. The Pacers, after Sabonis was gone, really didn't have somebody that they could throw the ball into and have them do something physical with. And I know the post is becoming, less important in the modern NBA. But in terms of also like you having a mismatch doesn't have to be a post up. That can also become a seal screen that helps a guard then be able to get to the rim. So I think him being a little bit more physical would help in that regard as well. But I think the main difference too is at the 5 spot, he can do a lot more as the screener in this particular offense. Like Rick Carlisle uses a lot of 2-man screening action. So I think that there will be opportunity for him to still, pop above the break, because he is a little bit different in that he shoots the 3 better above the break than in the corners. But I liked it from what I saw in Phoenix and with the Pacers, I like being able to see him as doing more as the screener than just always spacing out, because defenses don't necessarily respect him as a shooter, even though he can make those shots. They are going to take extra steps off. So,
yeah, it'll be interesting watching that development. I think what we've got for sure is that Jalen Smith is an NBA player, and we knew that. We knew that in Phoenix. He just didn't. Jalen Smith's problem is that, what was it, 5 days or 4 days after they drafted Jalen Smith, they acquired Chris Paul. Really, when Jalen Smith's name was called on draft night way back in November of 2020, because of the bubble and all that and the pandemic, the Suns were a 34-39 team. They were still based in youth and trying to establish themselves. And the drafting of Jalen Smith was probably, I don't know if it was a wild swing by James Jones, because he's not really a guy who projects forward on guys, but still it was legit, because the Suns needed a big man who could, as they described today, kind of be like a Jeremy Grant type. They had hoped that Jalen Smith could be more like a Jeremy Grant. He hasn't turned out to be that at all. He's turned out to be more of a Hakeem Warwick hybrid. Now, for Suns fans, Caitlin, Hakeem Warwick mixed with Ced Ceballos kind of player, where he's a little bit skinny, but he's so active that he racks up all the numbers in the minutes that he plays, but he's got his limitations, and that's why he's not going to be a full-time starter. Although said, I think he made an all-star game at one point in his career. And so if Jalen Smith has that kind of career, because he is a really good garbage guy, like you're right, he finds ways to get in front of the basket when the guards are getting double teamed. I saw a lot of, at least on the highlights, Jalen Smith finding the front of the rim basically for a quick pass, a dump pass when his guards were in trouble. So he'll be one of those guys who racks up rebounds, racks up points. I'm happy for him. I know he's an NBA player. I just don't know that he fit into the Suns scheme, because they want their forwards to all be switchable, and he doesn't really switch that well. So I hope he has a great career. He signed for exactly what he could sign for. The Suns did not want to commit $4.5 million to a guy who couldn't play in their system very well. The Suns handled it poorly, obviously. They should have traded him for more value, but it is what it is, and now he's gone. So let's move on to a better, a more exciting topic for us anyway, is what in the world is going to happen with Deandre Ayton. Now, of course, none of us have. Do you have inside knowledge on what's going to happen, Caitlin? Do you have
I will say that over the last 2 days, I've had a lot of people from within the NBA community already asking me and thinking that this is a thing that could come on and be like, are you going to be able to come on and talk about Ayton? That they've heard stuff that's circulating enough that they've already put out feelers wanting to know what my schedule is. So I do think that there's a lot of people that think that the Pacers at the very least are in on this. The biggest question mark to me is, what does Deandre Ayton want? I mean, obviously, we know he wants a max contract. He wanted that from the Suns. But in terms of how he sees himself as a player, what environment he wants to be in, does it matter that he goes to a winning team, that he, hopefully gets that money and is on a competitive team? Would he be willing to come to Indiana? Does he see himself as a fit with Tyrese Halliburton enough that he would look past that they're probably not going to be that competitive next year? I don't know what his motivations are.
Yeah, what's interesting is, in Zona, do you have comments on what you think DeAndre's motivations are right now?
Well, I just think he just wants respect. That's the main thing, and he wants a team that's going to respect him and allow him to, showcase his skills and probably be more featured in the offense. I'm not going to speak for him, obviously, but that's just what I would imagine after he's kind of sacrificed his role the last few years. So I could see him wanting to go to a place like Indiana, where maybe he has a little more involvement in their offense and gets to play with all these, shooters. They have a lot of great floor spacers, and you have Halliburton who can feed him the rock. So I think it's a good situation for him, honestly. And I wouldn't blame him if he went there and got a better payday. yeah, it's tough to tell for sure, but I think his main thing is he wants to get paid, he wants to be respected, and have more of a featured role offensively.
Yeah, Jim Rose Circus in the chat, and I'm sorry, folks, I'm getting behind on following the chat. We're out of practice on this. It's been like 3 weeks. Jim Rose Circus in the chat, the famous Jim Rose from Jim Rose Circus, huge fan, great friend, love you. His motivations are money, he says about Deandre Ayton. Hello in the chat. Ayton wants big money. You know what's interesting to me is I don't know that Ayton lives and breathes for money. I think Brandon hit the nail on the head. He wants the respect. He wants to be given the respect, and he's of the mindset where he wants the respect to be given to him rather than him necessarily earning it. He'd much rather just have the respect handed to him. He was shocked that the Suns didn't give him a 5-year extension this past year. But let me just take a couple of minutes to talk through the 5-year extension thing. Have you guys ever heard more in the past 10 years? Have you heard more in the past 10 years or more in the past 2 weeks about the limitations of players being traded and moved around that are on 5-year designated max extensions? Is it more in the past 10 years or more in the past 2 weeks? I feel like it's more in the past 2 weeks because Ben Simmons was acquired by the Brooklyn Nets this past year, and in trade, and he's on a 5-year max extension. A team that wants to build young players, young all-star level players, would love to have multiple guys like that, but under the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement agreed to at least 10 years ago now by the owners and the players was that no one team can acquire through trade more than one of those guys who's already in the middle of a 5-year max rookie extension. Now, there's also the same rule on the veteran extensions. You can't you can't trade for 2 veteran max extensions, like Devin Booker, for example. If Devin Booker was traded to another team, that team would not be able to acquire another veteran max extension guy on the same level. But it's 2 rookie, 2 veteran. You can't have 2 of either. We never heard about these things much until this past 2 weeks because of what the Nets are trying to do. They've already got Ben Simmons. They want to add. Well, you can't have Bam Adebayo. He's already on that 5-year designated max. You can't have Devin Booker. He's already on the 5-year designated max rookie one, and he will be on, and has agreed to the veteran one. So Devin Booker can't be added to anybody who's been acquired either. You can't do that with Donovan Mitchell either. So if Utah wanted to get involved in this trade to go 3-way to the Nets, that's great. But the Nets can't accept Mitchell unless they're trading Simmons. They can't do that. They can't aggregate those 2 guys together. So what the long story short here is James Jones said specifically a year ago that he did not want Ayton to be on a 5-year max. And because of that, you can't have 2 of them at the same time. He said it in terms of, and we interpreted it, maybe we just interpreted it this way. He said in terms of now that the Suns have Devin Booker on the 5-year max, and there's also a rule you can't have more than 2 players on a 5-year designated max. You can only have up to 2, and you can only trade for one of those 2. James Jones was saying basically, if we already had Devin Booker on 5-year, he said, I can't put Deandre Ayton on a 5-year and then hope to be able to acquire anybody I want to in the next year or 2 years. So that was the reasoning then. But it's also true that now Deandre Ayton would have been completely off the table for the Nets, even though he's kind of off the table anyway because of other weird issues with restricted free agency. He would have been completely off the table as yet another one of those guys on a 5-year. You can't trade for. So other teams trading for a 5-year extension guy becomes more difficult for them. So anyway, James Jones is playing chess, not checkers. It doesn't always work. You don't always win, but he's doing the things to not tie the Suns' hands. And like the Nets, their hands are tied. They cannot acquire another young all-star on a 5-year max, who's on a 5-year max, because all those young all-stars are already on those 5-year maxes. So now that he's got Simmons, they have to wait to draft their own. They can't acquire a second one. So anyway, there's just a rant here. Ayton was not more tradable if he had signed his 5-year max a year ago. That doesn't mean Now let's come back to the Pacers part. That doesn't mean he's not worth a max contract. It just means they didn't want him on that designated one, and that's the only one his camp would consider a year ago. This year, if it's not an extension, this year, if he signs a max, especially with another team, it's only 4 years, and it could be the max, and there's no issues with the trading. There's the base year compensation issue, but there's no issues with actually adding him to another 5-year max person. So the Pacers are looking at acquiring him. Do you see? Thanks for letting me go on that diatribe there. Do you see, Caitlin, Deandre Ayton being a max-worthy guy in Indiana, and how do you see him fitting in?
I think that's the key word, in Indiana. So I don't know. It would make me hesitant to pay him the max contract, given that he pretty much needs to be fed at this point in time. But he's very young, and if you're on a rebuilding team, he's going to have reps to the freedom to make mistakes. He's going to be having the ball in his hands and probably allowed to do more. He's going to be higher up the food chain, but also the Pacers have not had a number 1 overall pick play for them. And they're probably not going to recruit one of those types of guys in regular free agency to come and play for them. This is a very rare opportunity where they could get a guy who, in my opinion, I think that the pick and roll between Halliburton and Ayton would be magic. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it makes more sense for Tyrese than Miles Turner does. Because Ayton rolls to the degree that he does, Miles has never rolled on more than 50% of his possessions as the screener. Tyrese really relies on his range and his floater game, doesn't put a lot of pressure on the rim. Being able to have Ayton to get downhill with, being able to have Ayton to seal into switches, that's not really stuff that Miles Turner does. So it's going to be more on the timeline with the rest of the people that are on this team as well. So I've tossed this one around a lot, and in my opinion, I think if I'm the Pacers, I feel pretty good about offering him that based on what the rest of the fit of the team is and what I think Rick Carlisle is going to be able to do with him.
But Caitlin, Ayton doesn't rock the rim on slam dunks on those rolls. All he does is lead the league in conversion percentage on making those rolls, but he doesn't rock the rim.
Yeah, that's
sure
all
you
he
want
does.
a guy like that?
Yeah, I mean, there is, to be fair to that type of criticism, there was times in that Mavericks series where I did want him to play with more force in certain circumstances where he does lean on finesse. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of some of the same arguments that I've heard be made about Sabonis over the last few years. And when you're top 5 and points per game scored off the roll, I don't really care if you can play above the rim or not. You're just really good. So
we need you to be a Suns fan. But being an Ayton, covering Ayton, if he does end up in Indiana, you'll be able to explain that to your folks. But from what I hear, and I have to admit, I haven't watched a lot of Miles Turner in the last couple of years. He's not exactly, like you said, he doesn't really roll on the pick and roll, for one thing. And has there been criticism of him being less aggressive than fans would like him to be?
Oh, Miles is probably one of the most polarizing players that I can remember in my lifetime of covering the Pacers. Everyone has an opinion about how he should be playing. And it seems for him that there's always kind of a caveat. I mean, he's had a lot of different coaches in his timeline, and some of those, like with Nate McMillan, I think it wasn't all about Miles and whether he was popping or rolling. There was a lot of him working with Darren Collison, who's kind of a guy who's going to get off a screen and not get very deep. So then it was a lot of popping to 2. But in the minutes even before Sabonis came over, I mean, he actually rolled less when he was starting at the 5 than he has the last 2 seasons when he started with Sabonis. Midway through the season, I don't know if Suns fans will remember when the article came out where Miles was on the record saying, you know, I'm a glorified role player here. But midway through the season, the Pacers had worked. I know that they had worked very heavily with him on trying to get him to get better at, you know, using a little bit of a hop step to get out of the role quicker. And I think that had a little bit of mixed results, and that doing that, he wasn't really making contact on all of those screens. So then that was making things a little bit harder on the guards. I think in a lot of times in general, I think we think of spacing in very too much of absolute terms, and that, you know, he pops or he plays on the perimeter, therefore you're playing 5 out and the paint is open and people can get to the rim more. But when you look at the numbers, like if you look at the minutes when he was at solo 5, and look at the rim frequencies for Karis LeVert and Malcolm Brogdon and TJ McConnell and Chris Duarte, they got to the rim less when Miles was on the floor than they did with Sabonis. And that's kind of always been the narrative. Oh, well, Sabonis is clogging the paint when he's not out there. I'm like, yes, but Sabonis is one of the best screeners in the NBA. That helps people get to the rim. He also knows how to use his body around the basket. Like what I said earlier, if he doesn't get it on a post up, he'll seal that guy and help that guy get to the rim. And if you play 5 out with him up top, he can find cutters and thread passes to them to get to the rim. That's not really stuff that Miles necessarily does. So yeah, you do benefit from the positioning to a certain degree, but it didn't automatically lead to his teammates getting to the basket more just because he was standing out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what is your thoughts about Miles Turner in Phoenix? So I know you probably obviously haven't watched as much Suns as we have, but you really do know the game pretty well. So I thought I'd ask you anyway. Miles Turner with Chris Paul, how do you see that duo working?
It's kind of like what I just said about Tyrese. I think that Chris is going to play better with a roller as well. Now, maybe if Miles is playing with Chris Paul, because I mean, and this also applies to Tyrese, he's never played with a point guard the caliber of either of those two guys in his entire career. So maybe if he's playing with a guy like that, that can unlock some of it for him. But in terms of Chris being able to get to his elbow jumper, I think that that's going to be more open with somebody who's going to have some degree of roll gravity. Because that's kind of a thing with Miles, that if you watch him, like even when they were in the bubble playing the Miami Heat, there's just not a lot that he does that impacts the defense. Sometimes he takes advantage of how he's being guarded and, maybe he slips or whatever, but he's not providing a lot of inverse gravity to pull, shooters off the corner when he does go roll, or even necessarily from the perimeter. Like he shoots 33% from three. At the beginning of this season, he shot the ball very well. He was seeing a few more closeouts, and he has improved at attacking a closeout. He gets to the rim more often, just for example, than Jalen Smith would out of that type of stuff. But with regards to Booker, like on the surface, what I said too is like Booker didn't get to the rim as much last season. I looked that up on Cleaning the Glass before we got here. Like his rim frequency was down. So in theory, if Miles is out there instead of Ayton or instead of JaVale McGee or instead of Biyombo, maybe he does get there more often, but that didn't necessarily translate, at least statistically, for the Pacers this season. Defensively, I don't think Suns fans will be disappointed. I think he is as advertised. He's never made an all-defensive team, but he's a very good pick-and-roll defender, very good rim protector, pretty good at communicating as well and calling out where stuff needs to be. So you wouldn't see any drop-off there. I don't know that I would say he's necessarily as good at switching as Ayton is, but he can do a little bit of it under the right circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a great synopsis there. Zona, what do you think about Turner and Phoenix, if that's how it worked out?
I think there's parts to his game that seems like they'd be something James Jones would target. But then there's other areas where it's like, he's not a plus passer, can't really screen at a high level. He doesn't really roll to the rim, like Caitlin mentioned. So there's elements to his game where I'm like, yeah, I could see him fitting in with his ability to just like space the floor, protect the rim, smart defender. So in those instances, I think he would be a good fit, but then there's some areas offensively I kind of question with the Suns system currently. It's kind of why I think it's going to be a 3-team trade, and maybe they send him to Brooklyn because no one knows what Brooklyn wants to do at this point. So we'll just kind of see if they're just going to try to keep competing or if, how that goes. But I think Turner to Phoenix makes sense a little bit, but it's not very, it doesn't really move the needle if that's the only thing they're doing. So, I could see him and Durant kind of being the 4 or 5. But at this point, the free agency market for centers is just so dry that the Suns just might be stuck with him as their starter. So, let's
just check out some boxes. So first of all, Miles Turner coming back for Deandre Ayton in a sign and trade does work with all the weird base year compensation stuff. And the Pacers are not going to be they're not going to worry about having been hard capped at 157 million when they're not going to spend that much this year anyway. So those issues that the Nets have with acquiring Ayton are not the same issues with Indiana. And then the Suns bringing back a Miles Turner fits salary wise and also probably fits holistically in that you don't want to spend $30 million on a center if you're trying to spend your money in other ways. So that part does fit. Another thing to check, another box to check off. Big Merc in the chat is incensed about the Suns losing Frank Kaminsky. Guy, I hope you got bigger things to worry about than that. I think you're just having fun in the chat, but props to you. Sorry, empathy and all that. Yes, the Suns lost Frank Kaminsky to the Atlanta Hawks, but they replaced him with Jock Landale, who everyone's going to fall in love with probably anyway because he's got an Australian accent. How can you not? But anyway, back to checking some boxes. So that trade would fit. Now, there's another option of where the Pacers would just simply give Ayton an offer sheet to sign. And that's where Caitlin was talking about at the beginning. We don't know if Ayton really just wants to go to Indiana, especially if a Miles Turner is still there. And then we're pretty 100% sure, maybe 99% sure, that the Suns would simply match an offer sheet to Ayton because, again, the Suns only didn't want to give Ayton the 5-year. An offer sheet would be at best a 4-year, and that would be okay. So you bring Ayton back, and then he just can't be traded. Another box to check off is that Ayton is not a linchpin to the Nets trade. He's really not. The Nets, you can get a deal done with the Nets by doing a 3-way or by just headlining it with Mikal, and that'd eventually get done. Ayton is not the guy. If he kills the KD trade, if Ayton gets resolved first, that's not true. The KD trade would be just as much alive because KD wants Phoenix and only Phoenix, and almost never has a superstar not gotten what he wanted in the NBA. So that's eventually going to happen. I'm almost positive. Or he just stays with the Nets and the Nets refuse to do the trade. The Nets can refuse to trade him at all, but they won't be trading him to a different team because KD is right now not even taking calls from other players on different teams, let alone promising to be happy on another team. And nobody wants an unhappy Kevin Durant. So I just want to check off those boxes. First of all, the Ayton thing, it's almost certain that the Suns would match any offer sheet. So that's why the Pacers are probably going to want to do a trade. Miles Turner is a huge upgrade over a JaVale McGee type, right? But he's a downgrade from Deandre Ayton overall, although he plays just as good a defense most likely. Sorry, I've got little gnats flying in front of my face because it's that time of year. Anyway, so that works. The Suns would have to probably get a draft pick or two in that trade if you did a sign and trade. And Miles Turner comes back to Phoenix. And I think he's kind of a good fit in Phoenix. And then, of course, the KD trade is not dead. So I just wanted to make sure we check those boxes off. So, Caitlin, Kevin Durant. Obviously, I'm guessing you don't have any extra insight that Adrian Wojnarowski doesn't have on Kevin Durant's designs and wishes and all that. But how would you the latest on the Kevin Durant to Phoenix chatter is simply that there isn't any chatter. No one's talking about it, but we are in Summer League. Have you ever had a chance to go to Summer League at all?
I have not.
Zona,
No.
You haven't gone, have you?
No, I've not. I need to, though. I think next year is the year.
Yeah, I've been there several times, not in the last 2 or 3, but that is like the melting pot of all NBA people for a week. And that's where a ton of trades get put together, right? That's where because these guys are all sitting around watching basketball. They just sit next to each other in the stands. They sit next to each other. They eat together. They see each other in the hotels. Everything gets worked out that's going to get worked out, or at least germinated and figured out there in Vegas. So probably the KD thing won't get resolved over the next couple of days, but it might get resolved in the next 2 weeks, or at least they'll have an idea of what's got to happen. The Woj reported recently, or maybe it was Windhorst, that it looks like the Suns have not even offered Mikal Bridges in a trade for Kevin Durant. So there's smoke screens everywhere, but the Suns are basically lowballing. Dave King is an NBA Summer League experience. No, Tim Tompkins. Sorry. So says Jay, a buddy of ours who also does the Fan of the Flames podcast. We've been to Summer League together, and it is an experience. But there are people who've had more wild experiences than I. That's all I'm going to say. But anyway, I'm digressing here. The Kevin Durant thing is there's a lot of smoke screens going around. But likely the Suns are lowballing and the Nets are highballing right now, and they've got to eventually find the middle. We don't know when everyone is going to decide to settle. It could be a little while. Caitlin, do you have thoughts about Kevin Durant, of superstar mentality of just being able to decide for you before your new contract even starts, that you can just decide you're going to be traded and to where? Do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that that's probably going to be something that comes up heavily when the new CBA is negotiated. I don't think that the small market teams are probably pretty big fans of the fact that, more and more free agency is kind of disappearing and it's just becoming sign for your money now, ask out later. I don't think that that's necessarily ideal for the NBA. I am in support of players being able to make their own decisions and having their own reasons for their own lives and where they want to go and play. But being able, I don't think it's a completely equal playing field because let's be honest. I mean, not that Phoenix is a big market, but Kevin Durant's never forcing his way to Indiana. Like he's not going to say, "Oh, the only place I want to go is the Indiana Pacers." But in reverse, if the Pacers do pay, and I'm again, not saying this is going to happen, but when they do pay Tyrese Halliburton, it seems, possible that a guy of that caliber might, after a few years of that extension, be like, oh, I don't actually want to be here type of stuff. So I think that it's highly less than ideal.
Yeah, I agree. And unless it's my team that's benefiting from it.
Right.
But it's new for us, though. Like, this is not something, I mean, obviously Chris Paul, like that happened and that kind of caught people off guard, just given where the Suns were the previous decade, that he wanted to come play in Phoenix. And now it's kind of leapfrogged into Durant this quickly. And yeah, it's very new to us. I don't think I agree though. It's not a good look or level playing field, but it's about time, hopefully, knock on wood, if this thing gets done, that it's
as long as the gravity goes to Phoenix, we're okay with it. Right. Yeah. It may not be level, but as long as the ball
after this trade, they should definitely do something about it.
Well, actually, the Suns should just be exempt from all that. They should fix it as long as it's not to Phoenix, because after this trade, then you got to replace Chris Paul with somebody else who insists on coming to Phoenix. So yeah, this is the Phoenix. We are not used to this, right? Even way back in '93, the Charles Barkley didn't pick Phoenix. He said he wanted to be traded out of Philadelphia, and they sent him to Phoenix. The guys who picked Phoenix really is Steve Nash just wanted actually to get respect because Mark Cuban was lowballing him on an extension in Dallas. I mean, shoot, this is kind of unheard of. Then all of a sudden you got Chris Paul saying, I want to play with Devin Booker. And now you got Kevin Durant saying, I want to play with Devin Booker. Brandon, did you have any idea Devin Booker would be this influential among players? I mean, the guy hardly ever speaks.
I knew he had pull like early on in his career, just with some of the quotes we were getting from other stars, and like whether it was Kobe or Durant saying back when he's on OKC, he was like, we wanted Book, stuff like that. But it's kind of snowballed into a much larger effect than I could have imagined. So it seems like he's definitely the player's player. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely why when he gets a Supermax, he's definitely worth it because of what he can bring. So, Caitlin, do you have any thoughts on Kevin Durant in Phoenix with declining Chris Paul and Devin Booker? Any thought? Does that make them a contender or the contender in the league, or are there still better teams?
I mean, I don't know how Suns fans feel about it, but I feel like you have to go all in. Like I heard the same reports that you did, that maybe they're not putting Bridges or making him available, but I like Mikal Bridges a lot. But this opportunity, the timeline for the Suns is now. Like maybe if you're to the Toronto Raptors, you're not all banged up about giving up Scotty Barnes, or if you're Boston and you just went to the NBA Finals, maybe you don't want to get in on that, make Jaylen Brown available. But Chris Paul is going to be 38. Devin Booker's time's now. You don't know what's going to happen with Ayton. I'm guessing he's not on the team next year. But if you cheap out and you don't want to put all your assets out there and you don't get Kevin Durant and Ayton is gone and Chris Paul's 38, how does Devin Booker feel in a year or 2 years? I mean, I know that he did just sign the extension, but given the conversation that we just had a few minutes ago, I think that when a player of Kevin Durant's caliber actually is putting it out there that he wants to play for your franchise, you do what you have to do to get that done. That's my opinion. And something that Brandon touched on earlier is actually a really good point when he talked about, if Kevin Durant and Miles Turner are the 4-5, something that would do if that were to come into being is Miles has never really been defended consistently by fives. A lot of people don't know this, but even before Sabonis came over, Thad was starting at the 4. And if they went to a team, like they went to Philadelphia and played that night, Joel Embiid would just sag off of Thad. Miles wasn't putting Joel Embiid into space. Or if they went to Utah, Rudy Gobert would just guard Thad. And then Bojan Bogdanovic would guard Miles because he's not going to do a lot in the post. So if you have Kevin Durant out there, Miles is going to be guarded by fives every night. You're not putting a 5 on Kevin Durant in most circumstances. So you have that. And then also like another thing that's a drawback with Miles is the rebounding is a thing. So because Phoenix plays a lot of, wings at the 4 spot, that could be a little bit dicey. Like just as an example, when they were in the bubble and TJ Warren was starting at the 4, the Pacers gave up the highest opponent offensive rebounding rate in the playoffs, and I think in those 8 seeding games because of what the rebounding issues were. If Kevin Durant's at the 4, that's a little bit different. So, and then if you had some defensive issues because Mikal Bridges isn't there anymore, you do have Miles out there as a rim protector, and you would have Kevin Durant coming over. So I think that would make a lot of sense. And I don't know exactly what the sign and trade machinations would have to be, but I kind of assume that Chris Duarte might be headed that way as well. If you had Chris Duarte, I think he would fit into that Phoenix Suns system fantastically. And just as a side note, I would be very sad to give up Chris Duarte, but Kevin Durant loves Chris Duarte. When he was asked about who his favorite rookies are, he said Scotty Barnes and Chris Duarte.
Did he really?
Yeah. So if you had him out there and then like you're running Spain pick and rolls, you can run Chris as your back screener. He can do a lot of that type of stuff. And he guarded a lot of better assignments last year. So he looked very good in Summer League last night too as well. So
that's right. He's playing this year.
I love Duarte. I watched a lot of Pac-12 basketball, so he was kind of my sleeper pick heading into that year's draft, and he really broke out, and it's good to see him killing it in Indiana. I think if the Suns could get him back in any type of sign and trade, that'd be a win. He'd fit in their system like a glove, so I'm all for that idea. But the rebounding point with Turner is a great point because the Suns already struggle with rebounding, so that's my biggest concern if he ends up as their starting center.
Yeah, because he's not a great rebounder. So that'd be interesting. We'll see how it all shakes out. It still could be that Ayton goes to Utah, although Utah seems to have been cooled off a little bit. But mostly, I think that's because they're not sure they want to give up Donovan Mitchell yet in a 3-way with the Nets in them. So we'll just see how that shakes out. We'll see how the Ayton to Indiana thing shakes out. We don't know Ayton's motivations, like you say, Caitlin. We don't know if Ayton just wants to outright sign with it. Now, I thought it was interesting that Jalen Smith in the press conference, I watched that press conference with the Pacers, and he basically said he chose to be, he's smiling now for the first time in a while, and he chose the opportunity on the Pacers over the instant gratification of a little bit more money from, some other, maybe a contender or something like that. Everyone knows the Pacers are going into a rebuilding type mode where they're going to be winning on effort more than talent. So Jalen Smith chose the role, basically. He chose the role over a winning team. And he actually was unhappy being on as a young guy who you want your role. You want a chance to play. And he wasn't just naturally happy about riding the bench for, a contender. So I wonder what Ayton's motivations are, having been on the contender for a couple of years. Would he rather just get the biggest role possible in his next job, next team, or does he really want to prioritize winning? I think the younger guys want to establish themselves first before they win, if they had to choose. And so I wonder, but we just don't know. Nobody's talked to Ayton. So we'll find out. He has hinted that he wants to come back to Phoenix, but he wants the money. And people say money is important to Ayton. It is. But, I mean, the dude would rather just walk on the beach if he had a chance. So I don't know that money is like the end-all, be-all. But I think the respect that comes with the money is, and the role and the featured, being handed the featured role in an offense would be important for him. So we'll just have to see how all this shakes out. My prediction, and I'm going to ask you guys for percentage predictions here. First of all, percentage prediction that Deandre Ayton is wearing a Pacers uniform next year. Caitlin.
51%.
51. Okay. Brandon. Percentage prediction he's on the Pacers.
I will go 60%.
60. Okay. I'm going to stay probably in the 60-70 range. I think that's probably going to happen because there's just so much more momentum to it. I think it's almost certainly going to be a sign and trade, and the biggest possible, return is going to be Miles Turner, who fits into that. It'll be real interesting to see how it shakes out. I think there's about a 1% chance he just goes to the Pacers on an offer sheet and the Suns don't sign. So I think it's got to be that sign and trade. Next percentage chance, and then we'll let you go, Caitlin. Thank you for staying so long with us today. A percentage chance that Kevin Durant is in a Suns uniform next year. Caitlin.
Ooh. I'll go 60 on that one.
60. Okay. Zona?
I'll go 75. I'm pretty
A lot of
optimistic about
confidence
it.
there.
Yep.
Well, our confidence, and I'm going to say around 75 as well, because our confidence is that Kevin Durant it can force this. That's the thing, is that players ultimately can force these things because they'll tell these other teams they're not going to commit, and these other teams are not going to give up huge assets without a commitment from Durant that he's not going to want to be traded next year. So I do think that's going to happen because Durant's going to force it, and the Nets are going to get a little bit less value than they wanted. They're posturing right now saying, oh, you want us to trade you, Kevin? Well, we need 2 All-Stars and picks. Okay, yeah, no one's going to have that. No one's going to trade that. So, yeah, I think it's about 75%. All right. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Folks in the chat, 99%, 75, 40. Yeah, it's all over the board. None of us really thank you so much for joining us. Tell us where we can find you around the web.
Right. So my handle's there on the screen, and then I write at Indie Cornrows 2 times a week, and we also have a podcast that comes out bi-weekly as well.
All right. So Suns fans, when Deandre Ayton and Jalen Smith and Tyrese Halliburton are all starting for Indiana, you guys we can be Indiana can be our second favorite team. Thank you so much for joining us.
Just do me a favor, if DeAndre ends up there, that everyone spells it with a lowercase a and not a capitalized A.
That is a tough one. There's times where I want to get that in there. I'm like, no, resist.
All right. We appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. See you guys.
Yeah.
See ya.
All right. We have another half of the show. Don't go anywhere, folks. Zona, do you have any final thoughts on Durant to Phoenix that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I think if nothing gets done in the next 7 to 10 days, because what is it? The 17th is when the summer league ends. Then I think we're going to start to see this thing really drag out closer to preseason, which is less than ideal because Suns Twitter is already losing their mind slowly by the day. So this thing hopefully gets resolved in summer league, but if not, I could see it going on for much longer than we'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. If it doesn't get done in the next week, you're right. We're probably talking about pre-training camp, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay. So, and we can talk over time about the motivations of letting it drag out. I mean, geez, do the Nets and the Suns really want to just sit on their hands for months and not?
And the rest of the league is frozen too. So
and the rest of the league is frozen, waiting for this too. So we'll see if the rest of the league starts easing up and like doing the rest of their transactions. Then we'll know everybody has agreed that it's going to be training camp, and the Suns and Nets. A good thing about the Suns and the Nets is they're both in good shape if they go into next season as they are without changes. The Nets did sign some guys. They do still have Kyrie and Kevin Durant. They still could talk themselves into championships and all that. And so could the Suns. But we're going to move on. As Dan Allred says, he's our guy on Brightside who covers the young guys. And unfortunately for Dan, he has previewed at least 60 prospects the Suns could draft in the last 2 drafts, and the Suns have not made a draft pick. So I feel real bad for the guy. Now, though, we have Summer League and we have new signings. Let's talk Summer League first. Okay. And then we're going to talk about the guys the Suns signed in the past week to fill out the back end of their bench and the guys who left as well. But let's talk about Summer League first. Friday night, the Suns won by 20 points, and they didn't have a single guy on that team who is a prospect that the Suns want to groom for next year. And yet they look better than any of the Summer League teams we've seen recently. Did you get a chance to watch the Summer League game at all, Brandon?
I did, and it was a pleasant surprise. I guess I shouldn't be so surprised because you just look at the age of the average age of this team, and it's by far the oldest Summer League roster I could ever remember. And they have a lot of seasoned vets and pros, and
we'll call it eclectic.
Yes. So McKinley Wright is awesome. Ish Wainwright looked great. Hitting threes off like movement, coming off a pin down screen and just, draining that 4-point play. Just as a collective whole, they looked locked in, and it looked like the same Sun system carried over not the Maverick Series Suns, but just the regular season Suns carried it right over into that summer league game. It's fun to watch.
Hey, it's nice being able to talk about a Suns win. It's been months.
Yeah,
since
King was
been able
awesome. King is a bucket too. I forgot to mention him. That last year's summer league MVP.
Oh, that's right, Lewis King. Summer League championship game. Yeah, exactly. No, Lewis King was good. He's got skills. He reminds me kind of like a Derrick Jones Jr. in that he's got a lot of athletic talent, but not a ton of being able to score talent at the big league level. If he can make threes on a regular basis, if he can make smart plays on a regular basis, he can be definitely an NBA rotation player. McKinley. He looks good. He's just got some size issues. He's 5'11". He's pretty skinny, but he definitely looked good, and he could be a player that could be you'd want to sign to a two-way. But I really want to focus right now on. There was a lot of guys who showed out. They're all good players, but they're not necessarily roster guys. But there were some. The one guy I really want to focus on is Ish Wainwright. If he can develop into what I was thinking, like I wrote up a Summer League All-Stars article yesterday for Bright Side of the Sun. And when I got to PJ Tucker and I started thinking about that and looking up his history, Ish Wainwright is not that far off of a PJ Tucker. And what did PJ Tucker do? He turned a 27-year-old Summer League invite to summer, it's a summer league in 2012 for the Suns with Dan Marley as the summer league head coach. Ish Wainwright PJ Tucker turned that into, last time he had hair, by the way, PJ Tucker turned that into a contract with the Suns. And since then, guess how much, by the time he's done with his next contract, how much money do you think PJ Tucker will have earned after the age of 27 in the NBA, after having not been in the NBA for 5 straight years?
It's got to be close to 100 mil at this point.
$90 million. So he's made 60 million in the 8 years since, and he's gonna make another 33. That dude has made a hell of a career out of nothing. He came back from Germany, from playing overseas for 5 straight years, finally just did a summer league with the Suns and earned a spot, and he hasn't let it go since. Now, is Ish the same player as PJ? Not really. PJ was great on perimeter defense and one-on-one defense. Ish has not really shown that yet. He hasn't really shown a whole lot, but what he did show is he can make threes. And if he can continue to make threes at that level, he's going to have a great second half of his athleticism career, basically, for NBA level. But I really need to see him step up on the defensive end. He really has not shown out on the defensive end. But I am looking forward to the Suns actually signing him. The thing with Ish Wainwright is that he is an unrestricted free agent right now. He can sign with anybody. So it makes you wonder why the Suns haven't signed him to the veteran minimum. They signed 4 other veteran minimum guys in the past week. Why do you think they haven't signed Ish? Do you have any thoughts, Brandon?
Might just be waiting for the dust to settle from the KD trade. Not sure. Maybe they just want to see. They signed
4 other guys, and they still have roster spots.
That is true. Maybe they just wanted to see more from him before guaranteeing him a spot. I think there's still a lot of dominoes to fall, and I would like to imagine there's a plan or a reason behind it, but yeah, I think they just want him to go out there and earn a roster spot. And, that at the same time, that could backfire. Maybe another team sees what he's doing and wants to snag him from the Suns. But who knows? I think he wants to be in Phoenix. That's the main thing. It kind of reminds me of campaign last offseason, just like, this is the team that gave me my first chance. I want to stay here. So I could see him wanting to be in Phoenix and returning, but yeah, it is interesting that they haven't signed him yet.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. I'm hoping the Suns don't lose him just because he is such a great team player. He does fit in with the Suns culture really well. So that'd be nice to see him signed. Let's talk about the other 4 guys that the Suns did acquire or sign, at least in the past week. First one I want to talk about, Bismack Biyombo. The Suns re-signed him for a veteran minimum. That's a guy who was making $17 million a year until recently because he got signed in the summer of 16, the flush summer of 16. And he was making $17 million a year. Now he's working for veteran minimums. He loves being on the Suns. He loves being in this organization. What do you think about Bismack coming back?
I mean, it was necessary with JaVale gone. Frank obviously that happened after, but we all kind of knew that the writing was on the wall there, and the whole Deandre situation, you needed some big man depth, and hopefully put this in the show notes, but hopefully he's back as a backup center. Because as much as I love Bismack, if you're counting on him to be your starting center, then you're in trouble. But overall, I think, just his hustle and just the way he played. I'll never forget that game against the Hornets? That was his first game, right?
Oh yeah.
That was a very fun one. But
16 points, and
yep.
I mean, that was just out of the blue. Man, that whole December of backup centers was just crazy. I mean, This seems like 2 years ago, but it was just
really
this past December when Deandre Ayton and JaVale McGee both got COVID and they were out for a couple of weeks, and the Suns were
Jalen
mixing
Smith
and matching.
was putting up
Jalen Smith
doubles.
became an NBA player.
Yep.
Bismack signed off the street and gets a 16-8 in his first game. JaVale with the 19-15 game. I mean, it's just crazy. And that's even after Frank was great earlier in the year until he got a stress fracture. It's nuts how great those centers looked in those limited roles of finishing on the roll and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In the limited role that a center has, those guys did pretty well. So let's talk about really quick. Frank Kaminsky signed with Atlanta on a veterans minimum for guys who the Suns have lost since the end of the year. Aaron Holiday also signed with Atlanta on a 1-year veteran minimum. And JaVale McGee went to the Dallas Mavericks for $7 million a year for 3 years. That's why the Suns didn't re-sign. He wanted to come back to the Suns if the money was right.
I'm perfectly fine.
These guys eventually
letting him walk for that. Good for him though, getting that bag.
Yeah, you don't want the Suns doing $7 million a year for 3 years. And the Suns couldn't even do that. I mean, the max they could do is the taxpayer mid-level exception, which is 6.4, and that wouldn't have added up to the same money. And plus, they didn't want to sign him into his late 30s. They've already got some guys in their late 30s they want. So JaVale McGee, sorry to lose him. Frank was great off the bench, but man, he's replaceable, guys. I mean, let's not talk about losing Frank as like the end of the world. In Frank's place, it looks like the Suns have acquired a guy named Jock Landale. Have you heard of Jock Landale, Brandon? And how much do you know about this guy?
Yeah, going back to his college days, he was a stud at St. Mary's. Just way too good for college and was there for way too long. It felt like, but ended up playing for Australia's national team. Just heading to the Olympics, was a key player for them, and obviously had some limited time with the Spurs, and got dealt over to the Hawks, and Suns saw an opportunity and wanted in. I think he makes sense in the Suns system. He can shoot it, has size, pretty athletic too. Like he can get up and finish over people and put you on a poster if you're not paying attention for a second. Decent passer too. So, he's not someone that's really going to blow anyone away, but he'll probably play, 10, 15 minutes and be serviceable and fit into what the Suns like to do.
The perfect Frank Dario role, right?
Exactly.
A connector.
Just looking at the center position and free agency right now too, there's really nothing. The cupboards are so bare. It's Thomas Bryant was a guy that I wouldn't mind them taking a swing on, but obviously he went to LA. So, there's really no starting caliber centers left. That's why I think this whole Ayton Miles Turner thing is interesting. Just in the Suns' depth rotation with the bigs, with Dario, Jock, and Bismack. I think they're all serviceable, but they're not. You don't want any of those guys starting. I wouldn't think if you're a contender. So this whole Ayton situation is probably their only way they're going to find a starting center. Through a sign and trade at this point. So that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, you could be thinking about Dario as the starting center for next year, but Gerald Bourguet just caught up with Dario yesterday at Summer League in Vegas, and Dario said he's still just barely now doing contact against other assistant coaches. And this is the first time he's done any contact. He's been playing 1-on-0, if anything, in the past year since he tore that ACL, and he had a little bit of a setback last month. He's gotten over that setback. He is back on his rehab schedule, but he's still just hoping to ramp up and be able to be available for training camp. So you can't rely on Dario Saric being fully healthy at the beginning of the season. He's still going to be working his way back. Having Bismack back in there, you can at least have Bismack as your starter if you had to for 15, 20 minutes a game. The Raptors won a championship with that in 2019 with Bismack as a starter. But he obviously that would be a break glass in case of emergency situation. We'll see what, like you said, on the trade of Ayton, whether the Suns get any kind of center back for that. If Ayton went to Utah doesn't have any centers left, by the way. They would be sending back someone like a Bojan Bogdanovic. So the Suns would get another wing, but they'd be short on centers. So we'll see what happens with the Ayton situation. But Bismack and Jock Landale are now in that center rotation with Dario. Assuming Dario survives the KD trade, he might be a perfect inclusion point on a KD trade. So we don't even know if Dario will be back here. The other two guys the Suns signed are guards that would be what I thought was interesting is they signed Josh Okogie, who was a first-round pick in 2018. He played with Minnesota his first 4 years, but they non-tendered him. They let him go, made him unrestricted this year. And Damien Lee, who's a little bit older. So Josh Okogie's only 23 still. Damien Lee is like 29. He played for the Golden State Warriors off their bench. They're both 6'4", 6'5". They both would only back up Devin Booker. And the Suns already have Landry Shamet under contract behind Devin Booker. Devin Booker under contract for 7 years, 6 years from now. Landry Shamet's under contract for up to 4, minimum 2. So why do you think the Suns, Brandon, would sign? Let me do the what's the meme from Windhorst? Why do you think that is?
Why
the
would
Suns
they do that?
sign 2 6'4" guys who can't handle the rock, can barely score, can score. Oh, well, one can score, one cannot. They can't play any other position than Landry Shamet and Devin Booker positions. They're not big enough for forward, although Josh Okogie was considered a forward because he's got some size and he's got some wingspan, but still 6'4", 6'5". Why do you think the Suns did that? Sign those two guys?
Well, for starters, if you have we'll start with Okogie. I think he makes a lot of sense defensively, especially just when you have a team with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. Offense is not going to be the issue. So defensively, you're going to need a point of attack defender that can wreak havoc. And I think he's one of the best at what he does defensively. But then on the flip side, offensively, he's I wouldn't even say a 0. He's a negative at this point. Just he can't shoot, can't really finish. He's athletic, so that's something in transition he can get out and throw some dunks down. But outside of that, offensively, he's very unpolished, and you just kind of have to accept that with what he brings defensively. So if you can lean into that and just use him as like an identity piece that comes in for 5 to 10 minutes just to stir things up, then I think he's fine in that capacity. But move on to Damien Lee. He's just someone that's been a rotation player for the Warriors for many years now. He's not anything special. He's just kind of what I would say is like a decent floor spacer, plus free throw shooter, smart player, and I think will fit into like what the Suns like to do, but he's not going to go out there and do anything too much outside of himself. So just a couple like rotation players that have roles that they plug into right away. And, trading for Durant's going to take, probably 4 or 5 players along with like 4 or 5 picks. So just getting that depth there just before the free agency market completely dries out was probably the thought process, which it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. But yeah, I think not super huge on either of the signings, but Okogie's defense is something that piques my interest a little bit.
Yeah, I just thought it was they're obviously playable players, right? So a couple of years ago, the Suns signed Langston Galloway and Etwan Moore, who were basically the same thing, backup shooting guards, right? They were a little shorter and they couldn't play any defense. So Josh Okogie and Damien Lee, I think, are an upgrade over that pairing. And those weren't point guards either. So the Suns have done this before. I just thought it was really interesting because 2 years ago the Suns didn't have a Landry Shamet at $10 million backing up Devin Booker. So I'm not the biggest Landry Shamet fan, so maybe I'm trying to create a conspiracy that isn't there. But I think this portends that Shamet is likely to be included in a trade. His contract is extremely tradable. He makes $10 million a year for the next 2 years, but then he is non-guaranteed. And he is playable in a rotation, but he's not like going to set the world on fire. And he's got that perfect size contract when you're doing building blocks. Like, for example, acquiring Kevin Durant. You have to get to $44 million in matching contracts if you're not including Ayton. Guess what? You've got to include Mikal because he's the second highest, the highest paid available player. Mikal makes $21 million. There's 21. You add in a Landry Shamet, now all of a sudden you're into the 30s, and you really only have to do 75% matching, and I think the Nets are going to be happy with the 75% matching. So now you really only have to get $33 million. So if you can get them to take a Shamet, and probably they'll have to include Cam Johnson in this deal. I hope they don't have to include both Mikal and Cam Johnson. Then all of a sudden you're at the KD match, and you just include draft picks and you can go. But I do think they're gonna be wanting to include a Landry Shamet in a deal somehow this summer, and I'm not that disappointed in there.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add on to like the whole center situation, if like let's say DeAndre, like however that shakes out, they don't get a starting center back from that trade, and in the KD trade, like they don't get a center, then I think one way they can kind of get sneaky here, and I've been looking at other centers like salaries just for this reason, but maybe trade Shamet or Jay Crowder and attach a future pick or something to like a rebuilding team for a center. So I've been kind of looking around seeing who would fit that, but obviously that would
the Spurs.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a few teams I think that would fit.
Spurs
that
have Jakob Poeltl, and it just came out yesterday that what we've known the whole time, that the Spurs are willing to trade away the rest of their vets because they're going for draft picks. Once they traded DeJounte Murray for draft picks, you knew they were willing to trade everybody. And Jakob Poeltl is a great fill-in starting center.
Yeah, and guess who helped develop and coach him in at 905 was their new assistant coach, Mr. Mutombo. So I think it makes a lot of sense to target someone like that if they end up with zero centers from Ayton and Durant trades. But yeah, I think Shamet or Crowder are two names to watch just in terms of making a smaller trade like that. So we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of roster turnover, which is the opposite of last offseason. So continuity, RIP.
RIP. Yeah, so let's do this bold prediction. Of the 9 guys that are under contract and still currently with the team plus EA, that makes 10. Okay, so you've got your main rotation guys. They're all still under contract and on the team. Deandre Ayton, a restricted free agent. Of those 10 guys, so you're talking the full starting lineup and basically your full second unit. Of those 10 guys, how many come back? Asking in the chat too. Give us your answers in the chat. Of the top 10, do you want me to list off the top 10 so you know which guys I'm talking about?
That's important because there could be some
top 10. Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Landry Shamet, Dario Saric, Cameron Payne, Cam Johnson, Torrey Craig. Those are the 9 currently under contract. So you've got your 4 of your starters, because DeAndre Ayton is a restricted free agent. He's your 10th. So your full starting lineup, let's include Ayton in this. And then almost your entire main backups with Shamet, Saric, Payne, and Cam Johnson, and Torrey Craig. Okay, so you basically got your 2 deep on the 3x5 cards. Okay. Of those 10, how many come back next year?
I'm going to say 5.
You say 5. Woo.
I could even see
Yeah,
it being
look,
4,
if
honestly.
Kevin Durant trade goes through, I think you're definitely right. It's 5. Wow. So 5. So see Michelle Duenas. I wonder who that could be. That's a 6. 6 coming back. Fabio says 6 or 7. Sunders Dunk says 5, 6 max. Big Perk says 6. Coach Fallen Founder says 4. Wow. Okay, Coach. I think they're going to not go below 5. My Holy King says 5. My Holy King, I think, is a Nets fan because you've been talking about that trade the whole time. Yeah, this is great. I think definitely the Suns will be making some changes every year. Every NBA team turns over 40% of their roster. That's just the way contracts go. The Suns have an unusual number of guys still under contract with 9 of their top 10 in the rotation. Deandre Ayton being restricted. They could bring back the whole squad. It could be that the Suns just match an offer and then they just wait out the Durant thing, and the Durant thing never happens, and you bring back 6, 7, 8, 9 of those guys. But I believe the Suns are probably going to be in the 5 to 7 range. I'll do a bold prediction of 6 come back. 6 of those come back.
To your point,
Ted
real
Lubin
quick,
says 3. Go ahead.
I think if the Durant trade doesn't happen, then running it back is their best option at this point of the offseason,
because they're still a contender.
You're going to get worse if you try to do anything else, because you're not going to find, there's no one else like Durant that's going to move the needle that's available. So if you want to end up with like Miles Turner and like Harrison Barnes or something, that's I don't know, there's very limited options. So it's probably an unpopular opinion, but unless you're getting Durant, running it back is the next best thing you could do, which is kind of depressing, but it's the reality. So that's why I'm all in on Durant. I think they will get it done. It's just a matter of negotiation at this point.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that is interesting. But you know what? You only got, my Holy King, you only got your team if you can get Kevin Durant, committed Kevin Durant. The Nets got it. Every team has done whatever it took to get Kevin Durant. The only team that got him for free was the godforsaken Golden State Warriors in that summer, where they were able to keep everybody and bring back Kevin Durant, bring in Kevin Durant. And the only guy they had to lose was Andre Iguodala. Boo-hoo. So that won't happen again, but it might actually, when the next TV deal comes out, we might see a huge spike in the cap again. And that'll be interesting to watch. Okay. We are over an hour and 10 minutes in. Let's go ahead and start wrapping this up. We already did some bold predictions on how many roster players are going to come back this year. We did our percentages on whether Deandre Ayton is going to be a Pacer and whether Kevin Durant's going to be a Sun. What's your final bold prediction, your final thought that you wanted to share? Any final thoughts?
July 15th, Kevin Durant will be a Phoenix Sun. By
July 15th. So today is the 9th. So you think by the end of next week, Kevin Durant is a Sun?
Yes. That is my prediction. And if it doesn't happen by next week, it's going to be a training camp deal, which will suck.
Yeah, if it doesn't happen by the end of the next week, we got the summer to wait it out. That's true, because teams can just go on vacation. So why that date, Sonny Cortez, is because that's toward the end of summer league, when all of these management people decide they're going to go back home, and then everyone starts taking vacation for the next couple of months. Okay, so my final bold prediction. This is gonna be wild, and I don't think it's gonna end up true, but I'm still a huge fan of Deandre Ayton. I think the Suns keep Deandre Ayton. That's my bold prediction. Deandre Ayton, and it probably ends up in the Suns are playing a game of who blinks first on the offer sheet from the Pacers. The Pacers do get their cap space today, or it becomes clear tomorrow. I'm not really sure, but the trade of Malcolm Brogdon to the Celtics, which clears up all their cap space to do an offer sheet, gets finalized today at some point. At that point, the Pacers will have the cap space. The Suns don't like what's being offered necessarily, I don't think, from the Pacers, or there would have been a sign and trade already. The Pacers will make an offer sheet, and the Suns will match it. And then they can't trade DA until at least December 15th. That's my bold prediction. DA is with the Suns to start the season. I also think Kevin Durant joins the team.
So you think they'll have Ayton and Durant?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
absolutely incredible.
If their relationship is salvageable, then that's best case scenario. But I don't know.
I think any relationship with DA is salvageable. Everybody loves him. Bismack Biyombo just said yesterday he thinks everybody wishes he's back. I think the Suns want DA back. I think the Suns just didn't want to do the negotiation and didn't want the 5 years. That's it. So if the Pacers do an offer sheet, all the thinking is over. So I definitely, that's my bold prediction. Ayton stays.
Well,
Tappies, the Suns are not keeping Ayton. You are dumb. Are you in the front office with the Suns? Because that's the only way you would know this better than me. Thank you very much. So we'll see. We'll see you guys again next Saturday. That's the day after Zona's bold prediction that Kevin Durant is the Sun. So we'll probably be talking about Kevin Durant on the Suns next week. And we'll be talking about the Suns having matched a DA offer sheet. So next Saturday, we get to see if our bold predictions are true. All right, guys. Y'all, thank you for coming today. Really appreciate you being here. And we'll see you again soon. If there is any breaking news during the week, I'll try to get somebody on a midweek pod. So watch out for your podcast feeds. Otherwise,
if Durant gets traded, we have to do an emergency pod.
We have to do
no matter where we are, we'll get it done.
You know what? If Ayton goes anywhere or anything happens with Ayton at all, we may have to do an emergency pod too.
Yep.
So stay tuned. We'll be around and we'll cover this team. My final bold prediction is that the Suns are going to be a contender next year, at least as good as they were this past year, however they end up looking. But that's an easy one. So, all right. Talk to you all later. Thank you so much for coming on.